Right.
Welcome to Nusantara, the Southeast Asian archipelago. It is the birthplace of humanity, in our long journey of civilization. A homeland for human ancestors. For the last 1.5 million years. A place where our early ancestors have roamed a vast land of opportunity. Shared the space with many other wonderful creatures. Leave us the evidence of human evolution and their adaptation to the environment. Who are they? What do they look like? And how do they live their life? For almost 2 decades, the Center for Prehistory and Austronesian Studies has contributed to revealing the answers. Behind CPAS is a group of passionate scientists with global networking in prehistory and Austronesian studies. Our mission is to provide best practices in the framework of archaeological research and development. Pushing the values of our research beyond the knowledge. Reveals the national identity. Enriches our understanding of cultural developments. Unveil the reason behind our strong character of diversity. Narrates the story of ethnogenesis and the foundation of our nation state. Preserving our past as a heritage for the wealth of our future generation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, participant for CPAS talk show. It's 12. Today we are in the episode 12. So we will invite. We have today we already got present of Professor Peter Bellwood and Dr. Daud Aristanudirjo, our special guest today for the talk show episode 12 with the title Some Current Observation on World Prehistory, Australopithecus to the Austronesian. So as usual, we will have some introduction before the discussion for today from Professor Truman Simanjuntak. Professor Truman Simanjuntak, the time and place is yours to give us some introductory before the discussion. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih Mas Ruli. Selamat siang. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the talk show hosted by the Center for Prehistory and Austronesian Studies, CPAS. And this time we meet again at the CPAS talk show, a scientific discussion that we organize every month by Zooming to persistently update our knowledge in the field of archaeology, especially in prehistory and Austronesian studies and the related disciplines. Our objective is to bring the past to the present by discussing new findings or views that enrich our knowledge and broaden our outlook on the journey of the archipelago from the past to the present. The more we understand our history, the more we understand our identity as a nation. So far, the talk shows have discussed several hot issues by presenting distinguished Indonesian and overseas experts in different disciplines. To mention some, there are issues of paleoclimate and paleovegetation, sea level fluctuation, and the influence of human mobility and culture, and also early domestication. And in terms of Indonesianity or ke-Indonesiaan, there is a discussion about the plurality of the population of the archipelago and the acculturation process that has colored Indonesian civilization. Discussion of such issues reminds us that Indonesianity does not appear suddenly in the present, but it has deep roots in the past and will continue into the future. Today we have a special talk show presenting a very respectable guest speaker who I think everyone knows him very well. But if there are still among us who don't know or just know his name, let me introduce Pak Peter Bellwood. He's emeritus professor at the Australian National University, Australia. Pak Peter, as he is affectionately called, has light across in the study of prehistory. His books, which are numerous and published everywhere, have provided insight and enlightenment about global prehistory. I think the most familiar to us is the book of the prehistory of the Indo-Malaysian archipelago. The others in the wider scope is The First Farmer, and the newest one is Human Journey from Ape to Agriculture, as we just seen it in the introduction. One of his theories, which is very famous and relates to one of our ancestors, is about the Austronesian origins and migration. This theory, which is strongly supported by archaeological and linguistic data, is actually the main reference in prehistory lectures in universities. So in this occasion, Pak Peter will talk about the global prehistory. He will bring us on an adventure from Africa to Asia, including to Indonesia, to see the evolution of hominins from Australopithecus up to the Austronesian Mongoloid. This is a very broad topic, which at the university lectures can be given in 1 year or 2 semesters maybe. But here in this talk show, Pak Peter will deliver it in just tens of minutes. Well, we hope that this discussion will provide lots of new knowledge that broadens our understanding of world prehistory and, of course, of our prehistory too. Okay, so finally, I wish to thank all who are here. Especially, let me express my sincere gratitude to Pak Peter for being willing to give a lecture in this moment. Also, many thanks to Pak Daud, who will give closing remarks after the discussion. And of course, also thanks to Pak Marlon, who will guide the discussion. So finally, selamat berdiskusi. Terima kasih.
Okay.
Terima kasih banyak Prof. Truman. Sehat-sehat selalu ya Prof ya.
Selamat
Terima
sehat
kasih.
selalu.
Tetap semangat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We will enter the main program today. I will invite Pak Marlon Ririmase. Pak Marlon is head of Center for Archaeological Research in environmental archaeology, maritime, and sustainable culture from National Research and Innovation Agency Indonesia. Pak Marlon, apa kabar? Silakan di-unmute Pak Marlon. Apa kabar?
Ya, terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Pak Marlon akan membawakan acara sebagai moderator pada siang hari ini, dan tanpa ingin menyita waktu lebih lama lagi, saya persilahkan ke Pak Marlon untuk memandu acara pada sore hari ini. Bagi para partisipan, enjoy this discussion dan selamat menikmati Talkshow CPAS pada sore hari ini. Silakan Pak Marlon.
Terima kasih Pak Ruli. Thank you Ruli. Hello and a very warm welcome for everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome all participants in this monthly talk show of Center for Prehistory and Austronesian Studies. And thank you for everyone for arranging your holiday time today to be the part of this discussion. And to begin this discussion today, I would like to greet our speaker, both two honorable speakers. First is Professor Peter Bellwood from the Australian National University, and the second is Pak Dirjo from UGM, and also of course for Pak Truman and everyone from the CPAS that has been very generous to arrange this discussion for all of us. And I think Pak Truman already shared a very generous and a clear introduction for both of the speakers, so we can move directly to the presentation and discussion. And as mentioned that by Pak Ruli, that today Pak Peter will present a topic on some current observation on world prehistory, Australopithecus and the Austronesian. And the presentation of Pak Peter will be around 45 minutes before we open the room for the question and discussion. But for everyone who probably already have questions during the presentation, please kindly write them in the chat room for us to be discussed later. And therefore, I would like to invite Professor Peter Bellwood to share his presentation today. Please, Pak Peter, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Marlon and Truman and Dowd. I will start. I am just trying to share. Okay. Can you all see my PowerPoint clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. And
Not yet, Pak Peter.
oh, you can't see? Some people
Okay.
can't see. But I am screen sharing.
We can see it already, Pak Peter.
You can see it. Okay, you can see it. Good. Okay. I will go back. Now, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm afraid I must speak in English. It's a long time since I undertook field research in Indonesia, and so my knowledge of Indonesian is a little bit rusty at the moment. But I will try to speak slowly and clearly.
Thank you.
It's also, can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, it's good.
It is many years since I've done research in Indonesia, and I have no new information to give you. I'm no longer involved in active field work because I have now retired, of course, and most of my time nowadays is spent on writing books. very general books that cover much of the world. There are three that I list here. Some of you might have seen my book, The First Islanders, that came out 5-6 years ago. That was a rewritten version of prehistory of the, something has moved. That was a rewritten version of the prehistory of the Indo-Malaysian archipelago. Then the 5 Million Year Odyssey that came out the end of last year, and First Farmers also the end of last year. But notice that it is a second edition. The old one was 20 years ago. This is a new one that has been completely rewritten. I don't know how easy these books are to find in Indonesia. They may be difficult. They take a long time to arrive in Australia. But hopefully one day they will be available. And I'm going to talk about some concepts, especially from the Odyssey and the new First Farmers, some concepts and questions that I think are of relevance for Southeast Asia and Indonesia. I don't have time to talk about the whole world. I cannot talk about Africa, Europe, America. That is impossible. There is not time. But I will try to focus on some issues in human, cultural and biological and also linguistic evolution that take us from the first hominins to present day people. In the case of Indonesia, most of the present day people are the speakers of Austronesian languages. Not all, of course, and not in Papua or many parts of Eastern Indonesia, but certainly in the major islands of Indonesia. And I would stress here that my deep view here that I've held for many, many years is that the hominin or human past cannot be understood from the perspective of a single discipline. True understanding must come from a multidisciplinary perspective that combines biological and genetic, cultural and archaeological, and also linguistic perspectives. Okay. Now, some questions that I will begin, of course, with the Pleistocene and with the non-sapiens hominins, Homo erectus, and so forth. I've got three questions here that I think are very important for Indonesian archaeology. One of them is, of course, must be how many successful movements by the genus Homo occurred out of Africa into Eurasia and to Indonesia, I guess, during the Pleistocene. Now, if we think about the glacial to interglacial cycles of climate change, there may well have been 20 or more periods of interglacial climate, like today, when humans could migrate through Arabia and the Sahara Desert and so forth, and leave Africa. However, the records from paleoanthropology and of mammal faunas, and now ancient DNA from the modern humans and Neanderthals and so forth, probably indicate that there would have been 3 or 4 movements, major ones that is, one of them being early Homo, possibly with separate movements for ancestral Floresiensis and Erectus. This is a much argued situation, of course. Floresiensis, is that simply a small Homo erectus, or is it a separate movement out of Africa? Then we have the early Middle Pleistocene, large-brained Homo, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Now, I suspect here that we're looking at 3 or 4 major movements of ancient hominins. But I would bring up, I'll just move now to this third point, this question: what were these paleo species? What was Homo erectus, as named by their discoverers, whoever it was, Mayer or somebody used the term Homo erectus? Were they reproductively isolated, or at any one time did they interbreed interbreed to some degree, like Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Sapiens were able to do in the Middle and Late Pleistocene. We know that from ancient DNA. How long did hominins require to lose the ability to interbreed with members of cousin species? Was it 1 million years, 2 million? And in fact, did they ever lose this ability? Or were they always part of in a sense, a population across the Europe and Asia and Africa that was able to interbreed, even when members of species separated by long periods of time came back together again through migration, because hominins were always migrating. And I suspect that this crossbreeding, interbreeding between different hominins was going on all the time. The main exceptions might have been, of course, Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, because they went into isolated islands. After they arrived, they probably never had contact again with anybody on the Asian mainland or in Java. One clue to this is because their brain sizes never increased. Had there been, I think, frequent contact with, say, Homo erectus in Java, then their brain sizes would have increased through time. For some reason, I cannot. Why can't I change the? Here we are. Okay. Now, here we are. I'll just look at a few slides illustrating this now. Here we are in the homeland of humans, or what we think is the homeland, mainly because the Rift Valley and the South African caves preserve deposits of fossils that can be seen and collected. Much of Africa, of course, doesn't have a fossil record because of the environment. The situation is not suitable for seeing fossils in the ground. Don't forget that much earlier, long before hominins existed in the Miocene, the great apes expanded across Africa, Europe, and into Asia. That is why there are orangutans and chimpanzees and gorillas. But they, of course, have shrunk greatly as a result, I think, partly of the expansion of Homo sapiens and surviving in small pockets. Okay. So this is presumably where all, or at least the beginning of the hominin record begins. It takes a long time, I think, to change the slides. Yes, okay. This is how I would see the expansion of early hominins towards Indonesia, mainly through tropical latitudes, although there are sites like Shangchen in China that are claimed to have the oldest stone tools in Asia, and these are quite a long way north. This is perhaps just a little more than 2 million years ago, although many of the dates for stone tools, I think, are often somewhat uncertain. The oldest hominins outside Africa, of course, are these ones from Dmanisi in Georgia at about 1.7 or 8 million years. So I see a tropical expansion, probably through Sinai or the Bab el-Mandeb, during interglacial times when this peninsula of Arabia was much wetter than it is now, and people could pass fairly easily, entering Southeast Asia. And here, of course, we have the sites in Java, Homo erectus. Homo erectus is one of the longest lived of the ancient hominins for possibly 1.5 million years. And that is very interesting. Come on, change. Okay. One thing about Homo erectus is that I think is very important. These E letters here are Homo erectus in Java, and this is the solo population. They increased in brain size through time, like all the other old world hominins. This is antecessor. These are Neanderthals and early sapiens here in the black area. These H are heidelbergensis. They increased their brain size after about 2 million years ago. Homo floresiensis, of course, never did, which I think does suggest to me that it was a very isolated species. Okay. So we're looking at changes like this. This is an Australopithecine, Lucy, small brain. Notice the sort of good tree climbing hands. An early Homo from Turkana in Kenya, with an intermediate brain size, I suppose about the size of Homo erectus. And some people would call these fossils early Homo erectus. And here is a modern human here with a much larger and more globular brain size as compared to a chimpanzee, our closest cousin. Well, one possibility here is that, and I am convinced that hominins evolved in Africa. People have sometimes claimed it other parts of the world, a recent claim for, I think, Germany, but I'm not totally convinced by that. I think it's Africa. The genetic and fossil evidence is so strong. So we have developments of Australopithecines, early Pleistocene Homo moving into Eurasia, possibly with the small hominins in Flores and Luzon, possibly also early Homo erectus to Java by sometime between 1.5 and 2 million years ago. Then we have the movements out separately from Africa, I think, of Neanderthals and Denisovans, who, of course, do not descend directly from Homo erectus, and probably spread out of Africa separately about, well, 700 or 800,000 years ago. And then we have the spread of early Homo sapiens after about 300,000 years ago. This shows something similar. I won't go into detail, but some of you may know that with Homo sapiens, of course, there are a lot of claims for very early forms of Homo sapiens, long before the main genetic migration that took place possibly 50 or 60,000 years ago. That was the main genetic migration out of Africa. But there were earlier movements, and of course there are claims of older fossils. Homo sapiens remains in Indonesia from caves in Sumatra, for instance, and Java. But the main movement of Homo sapiens genetically and in terms of the paleoanthropology, modern, fully modern crania, between, I suppose, 50 to 60,000 years ago. So we can see some of the individuals here. This is not, of course, a family tree. Many paleoanthropologists even now argue furiously about these fossils. They disagree of whether they're Homo or what. I mean, I've heard recently Ian Tattersall in his book, Understanding Human Evolution, thinks that the Dmanisi remains are not Homo at all. They're some other kind of hominin, some sort of Australopithecine, I suppose. And of course, many people have claimed the same thing for Homo floresiensis. I'm pretty convinced that Homo floresiensis is a member of the Homo genus, but it is a remarkable kind of mystery in many ways, as I'll just come to in a moment. Here is the Homo erectus from Sangiram 17, Atapuerca. Kafse, of course, is an early Homo sapiens from Israel, but when compared to the modern one, notice how much of the brain case, of course, has a similar shape to Neanderthals. So that there is much argument about whether these early Homo sapiens were a major movement out of Africa or whether they were a failed one. I just thought I would show you this photo. I went to Atapuerca in Spain. This is the most amazing site. Many of you will know, of course, that the caves in southern Africa and in Jokodian near Beijing and in Atapuerca are inside big limestone mountains. They're completely sealed and full of sediment and fossils and stone tools. In this case, here on the right-hand side, you can see that there is part of a railway cutting made in the 19th century, now abandoned, and they cut right through the deposits in this cave, which are here being excavated. This is where Homo antecessor comes from, deposits going back to 700,000 or 800,000 years ago. And of course, other caves in the Atapuerca Massif have produced remarkable results of early Neanderthals in the case of Cima de los Huesos. I won't go into more detail about this. I'm trying, okay. Homo sapiens, yes, well, some fairly quick questions, of course. When did the main out of Africa dispersal occur? I've little doubt Homo sapiens comes from Africa. We're all from Africa. Our DNA tells us that. Okay, our DNA tells us that. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah, but Peter, we can hear you clearly.
We can hear you. Okay, all right. Yes, when did its main out of Africa dispersal occur? In this, the genetic and paleoanthropological chronologies are in some disagreement because of these claims of much earlier Homo sapiens in Asia, much earlier than the genetic record appears to allow. And another question, can those lithic technologies, Acheulean, Levallois, Upper Paleolithic, be equated with separate hominin species? Well, I don't think so. I mean, just to go to the Acheulean, of course, as we all know, it has never been of major importance in Indonesia amongst Homo erectus. There are occasional bifacial tools, but there is no Acheulean in Java in the way that there is in Africa or Europe. They're regional phenomena. And most importantly, I think what we call the Upper Paleolithic in terms of stone tools did not record all the movements of Homo sapiens out of Africa. I think mainly cold climate regions beyond the tropics in southern Africa, as well as in Europe and most of non-tropical Asia. Now, of course, as we all know, in Indonesia, there is cave art in Sulawesi, there is ocean crossing, Sulawesi and Borneo. There are many indications of modern human lifestyle, and there is no doubt that modern humans came to Indonesia, I don't know, 40, 50,000 years ago, maybe, or whatever. But they didn't bring with them a classic Upper Paleolithic industry of blades and burins and bifacial points and back blades, micro blades, things like that. So the stone tools are very difficult to equate with human species. And well, this is my diagram, I suppose, Matt, for the initial movement of Homo sapiens. Again, I think Homo sapiens, again, is a tropical creature. It evolved in tropical Africa and spread initially through warm climate locations, probably between 50 and 60,000 years ago. That is at least the ancestors of the people alive today. There might have been earlier archaic forms of Homo sapiens, but they don't appear to have produced any living populations now. And in the case of Australia, of course, there have been recent claims from this site of Majed Bebe for dates going back to 65,000 years ago. Those are greatly favored by the newspapers and the TV. They all like to say that. But if you read the reports on that site, you will find that the dates are luminescence dates. They are between 65 and 53,000 years ago, and they're associated with ground stone tools, which is very strange because nowhere else in the world are there ground stone tools until about 40,000 years ago in the case of Japan and possibly in some other sites in northern Australia. Ground stone tools don't appear in southern Australia until the Holocene, and they were never made in Tasmania, which makes me wonder what is going on here. Are these dates for ground stone tools of 65,000 years correct? I am very uncertain about this. I don't really believe it. Now, when we come to food production in the Holocene, and again, a number of very important questions arise. Initially, food production, I think, did not develop in Indonesia or even in island Southeast Asia, apart from the New Guinea highlands, and I'll come to that in a moment. But the question here is, when we're talking about homelands of food production, I think we have to differentiate between homelands of agricultural behavior, where hunters developed into farmers and lived in villages and cultivated domesticated plants and animals, and the places where specific plants and animals were domesticated. There are many, many places where plants and animals were domesticated, and many of them are not homelands of food production. But some of them, like the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, and China, and Mesoamerica, certainly were homelands of agricultural behavior. And as Jared Diamond pointed out many years ago, places like the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East were very lucky because they had so many very important annual cereals and legumes like peas and beans and cattle and sheep and goats, pigs, very important animals food-wise that are still the basis of most of the world's diet today, or at least a major part of the basis. The same thing, of course, applies to China with rice and to Mesoamerica with maize. They are incredibly important crops. And it's not surprising that the Fertile Crescent went on to produce the oldest villages in the world and the oldest writing and the oldest states and pyramids and all that kind of thing. I mean, it all, of course, fits together very well. In terms of China, there have been some new directions. I think the most important one for me is that long ago, most people spoke about rice because rice is a large grain plant and the rice grains survive very well. So many people wrote about rice, but now we know that millets, which have very small grains, foxtail and broomcorn millet, were very important as well early in the Neolithic, probably in the migrations of the Sino-Tibetan populations in China, North India, Burma, Western Thailand. Millet was very important. And in the sites I've been working on in Vietnam recently, I'll talk about those a little bit later, we have found quite a lot of millet. And I will talk a little bit about New Guinea, about Vietnam and Thailand. And also I want to say a little bit about the New Guinea highlands in a moment. That's very important, and it has become important recently with DNA research. And I'll move, of course, to Ireland, Southeast Asia a little bit later with the Austronesians. But let me just move on. These, to me, are the places in the world where agricultural behavior really started, where people started as hunter-gatherers, domesticated plants and animals, increased their populations very greatly, and settled down into villages and more complex lifestyles. Even in the New Guinea highlands, although pottery was never invented there, but villages, of course, were dense populations in the New Guinea highlands. But we have East Asia or China, mostly Fertile Crescent, the Sahel and Sudan, millet domestication in Africa, Andes and Amazonia, and Mesoamerica. But I would stress here that while many people after the end of the Pleistocene were moving towards food production, including no doubt in Indonesia, some of them moved more quickly than others, especially those in favored locations with many important domesticated species, like, of course, the Fertile Crescent, like China, like Mesoamerica, and like the Andes and Amazonia. Just a few slides about the Fertile Crescent. Here we are. The developments, of course, are all in this belt of rainfall agriculture between the mountains up here and the deserts down here. So many, many sites with, in recent years, some incredible discoveries. Göbekli Tepe in a site that I have visited, remarkable remains about. These are sort of 9,000 BC with massive stone pillars with carvings on them. And then later Neolithic sites I won't go into details about these sites, but you can see the kind of stone architecture. This is the tower, stone tower at Jericho. Increasing reliance on domesticated species by 7,500 BC. I think I know what is happening here. I'm sorry. Somebody else is changing the slides, aren't they? That's right. Yes, I thought I was changing the slides. I'm not showing my PowerPoint. You're showing the PowerPoint I sent to you this morning, which I've actually changed. Yes, of course. Now I understand. That's all right. Let us carry on. Okay. I did make a few changes to the PowerPoint, but it doesn't matter. Let us. Can I share the screen again?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. And I will do this one. Sorry. Where did we get to? We got to. I don't know where we are now, but I will share. Oh dear. Now I have to. Sorry. Go on to where we stopped, which is in.
We were in slide. We were in slide number 15, Prof.
Yeah. Let's go. Okay. Here we are. Yes. All right. Well, this is the Fertile Crescent again. The oldest sites are in this area. It includes also the island of Cyprus and southern Turkey. And this is the distribution of wild wheats and barleys as calculated many years ago by a paleobotanist called Gordon Hillman from London. He's dead now, but he did very good research in the Middle East. And of course, this is what happened. Around about 7,200 BC, an artist's reconstruction of an incredible village, Abu Huraira in Syria, but many of them, like the one called Çatalhöyük in Turkey, would have been like this. Huge villages with thousands of people in the late pre-pottery Neolithic B. At about 6,500 BC, these populations spread into Europe. We know that now from the ancient DNA and the archaeology and the paleobotany, the ethnobotany of the plants. But they spread. The beginning of the Neolithic in the Middle East was without pottery. People used to grind up wheat to make bread, which they baked in ovens. They did not use pottery. But round about 6,500 BC, they began to depend much more on the milk of animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. Now, they couldn't digest that milk very easily. They couldn't digest the lactose because they had not developed the genetic ability to do so. Most people in the world at that time did not have that ability. Nowadays, of course, many people, like many Europeans and Africans, do have that ability because of genetic change. But in those days, they had to use pottery to boil or ferment the pottery, the milk, to make it available like yogurt and cheese and other kinds of liquid things made out of milk that are not fresh milk. And then it spread through Europe. But notice that it took a long time to spread, 6,500 BC here in Greece, but only 4,000 BC in Britain, 2,000 years. There was a lot of population replacement, some very rapid movements in Central Europe, the linear band ceramic. But generally, it was a slow process. And I know for absolute certainty, this involved a lot of human migration. But let us not think of thousands of people all migrating at the same time. What you have to think of here is people in small groups migrating, but with a massive ability to increase their population because they had lots and lots of children. Now, of course, these populations were spreading men, women, and children. And the women are obviously very important because they bear the children. And the more women in these groups, the more rapidly they could grow. And as we know from recent colonial times, modern human populations can very easily have per family 8 or 10 children as an average. I mean, that is quite possible for humans to do that. And I think that many times in these early migrations of farming populations, they grew very rapidly. It is not that tens of thousands of people came from Turkey, but as they moved in small groups, they settled and they grew in numbers very, very quickly. And I think that's probably what happened with the Austronesians. They did not migrate. as thousands of people. They were just small families in boats, but once they reached new lands, they developed their population sizes very quickly. Now, the Fertile Crescent Neolithic also expanded east, at least from Iran, probably into South Asia, India, Pakistan. And a late pre-pottery Neolithic reached Mehrgarh here, but then it stopped for 2,000 or 3,000 years, I think, because India, like Indonesia, has a monsoon climate. It rains in the summer. In the Middle East, it rains in the winter. So wheat and barley took a long time to adapt to the Ganges basin because of the different climate. And as you will know, wheat and barley never really got into Southeast Asia as major crops. They are not suited to tropical monsoonal environments. After Mehrgarh and the settlement of the Indus Valley, of course, this remarkable civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, you're probably all aware of the major cities in the Indus Valley. Many years ago, I visited Mohenjo-daro. It is the most remarkable archaeological site. I think these people moved into the Ganges basin and they became the northern Indians of today. They became the people with their Vedic Hinduism and later their Buddhism, who of course sent their traders and other knowledgeable people to Indonesia, so that you have the Borobudur and Prambanan. That tradition of Indic religion, I think, goes back to this Indus Valley civilization. I won't spend more time on that, but China, of course, well, now we know that major Neolithic developments in the north. This is one of the millet sites in Banpo, a village with ditches. Lots of sites have ditches, big populations, lots of warfare, I suspect. People had to protect themselves because the population was increasing very fast. So millets in the north, the rice around the Yangtze River, in between sites that have both rice and millets, like Jiahu. This is Homudu near the lower Yangtze, a reconstruction of one of the pile houses, very famous site with lots of early domesticated rice. This is a reconstructed house. The ladder of the step of this is modern, of course. They would have had a notched log in ancient times. And you can see very good wood survival in Chinese sites. This, by the way, is an earth oven, but not of stone, but of clay balls for cooking a very large animal, like a deer or a pig or something like that. And the movement of rice. Rice, the oldest rice in the general area of the Yangtze River, taking a long time to spread south because it's spreading across latitudes, and it's spreading into areas where the day lengths during the year are changing. The day lengths on the equator don't vary, but up here there is a winter and a summer, and rice took a long time to adapt. This dating down here is much younger than it is in the Yangtze Basin. And of course, much younger in India because it's a different species of rice. This is, there are different subspecies, indica rice over here, so-called japonica rice here, which is the one that was first brought to Indonesia through the Philippines, I suspect. Minangkabau has excellent survival of rice phytoliths, probably from about 1500 BC. I think that this is the earliest dated rice in Indonesia at the moment. Java, I think, will be very important for rice research one day if you can find some big Neolithic sites. As for Gua Sire, and you might have heard of this site in Sarawak. I excavated the site with Ipoi Datan, but a few years ago, my colleagues Dorian Fuller and Tim Denham looked at the wild rice, or the rice that was dated, and they think it's wild rice. I don't think Gua Sire is a good date for rice, so I would withdraw that. Just a little about some of these mainland sites where I've been working in Vietnam. Rudiep, Taklak, and Shern, Lok Yang, Rak Nui. These, I think in Vietnam and Thailand, the Neolithic now appears soon after 3000 BC, quite early, about the same time as it does in Taiwan. And in northern Vietnam, there are sites like Con Con Mua and Con Con Mua in particular, where we have a kind of late Hoabinian culture with ground pebble axes and very thick, coarse pottery with vine rolled decoration. This is not Neolithic. I've called it para-Neolithic. It is indigenous hunter-gatherer populations on the eve of the Neolithic. I think probably in contact with farming populations in China, which may be why they adopted these technologies. This dates to about, I think, 4,500 BC or something like that. At about 2,800 BC in Vietnam, we get the appearance of quadrangular adzes. Quadrangular adzes, adzes with a single bevel rather than the double ones you get in most axes. Shouldered adzes, fish hooks, nephrite ornaments, Vietnam or Chinese nephrite. This is not from Taiwan nephrite. Kok Panom Di, thousands of shell beads, remarkable burials, and some incredibly decorated pottery from southern Vietnam. This is Thailand, this is southern Vietnam, this is northern Vietnam, sites up around Hanoi, where the pottery is very, very beautiful, back to about 2000 BC. In a sense, it is similar, of course, to the Lapita pottery that occurs in the Western Pacific. It's a different tradition, but some of the ideas, the stamping and the decoration, they are the same. They're different people, but the same kind of ideas. New Guinea has become very important recently, the sites of Wime and Cook especially, for the indigenous domestication of yam, banana, sugarcane, maybe taro plants, but most taros now I think are thought to be genetically from Southeast Asia rather than New Guinea. There's been some debate about that recently. But you will notice that New Guinea is an island in its mountainous structure, this cordillera of very high mountains on the top end of the Sunda, of the Sahel shelf. It is very different from the islands of Indonesia that have volcanoes, or even in the case of Borneo, much lower mountains. This has a very, very high cordillera with big valleys at 2,000 meters above sea level. And it is a unique island. And the highland people here appear to have invented their own agriculture. These areas were never settled by Austronesians. They never got there. There were farming populations there before them. And some of these Papuan populations, we now know from DNA research, ancient DNA in the Western Pacific, spread from the Bismarck archipelago here, New Britain and New Ireland, into the other islands of Melanesia, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, after Lapita times, producing a dominance of Papuan genetic ancestry as far east as Fiji, but they adopted Malayo-Polynesian languages. This is very interesting, a major migration in which they adopted the languages laid down before by the Lapita people. That's probably because the Papuan languages were very ancient, very diversified. The Malayo-Polynesian ones were recently spread, very similar, and they would have served as lingua francas, languages of, like Bahasa Indonesia, languages of common use between people who speak totally different indigenous languages. That's extremely important. So in the Western Pacific, of course, we have Melanesian people from Vanuatu here who have New Guinea-derived DNA, and we have Polynesians in the Cook Islands who have South China, Taiwan-derived DNA with a little bit of a mixture with Melanesian people. This was observed 200 years ago by Europeans, and they couldn't work out why, because the Polynesians, of course, and people in Vanuatu speak related languages, quite closely related languages. This is extremely interesting. Their DNA is different, but they speak quite closely related languages. And this is going back in Indonesia now to earlier phases where we have this interesting two-layer hypothesis of Hirofumi Matsumura. I think Hiro is mostly right on this. The ancient sort of Hoabinian type burials of the early Holocene, late Pleistocene are sitting or squatting. They don't have grave goods. They have distinctive Australopapuan facial features. In the Neolithic, like here at Gua Harimau or Metal Age, they're laid on their backs with pottery. These are probably, I suppose, early Austronesians with copper and bronze by about 500 BC. A major change in burial types. Now, this is my final point, and I'll try and finish in a moment. I just want to, Austronesian, why do we bother with it? Many of my archaeology colleagues say, why do you waste your time talking about languages? They're irrelevant. Well, they are not irrelevant. Language is the main aspect of the identity of many of us. Language is incredibly important to me. Why study the major language families of the world? What was their significance? I have little doubt that the origins of the major language families, including Austronesian, occurred long before the beginnings of historical records and in close combination with the migrations of human populations. Maybe not huge or very large human populations, but human populations that had the ability with their domesticated plants and animals to increase their numbers very greatly when they got to new places. Conquest alone never spread languages. Now you look at Dutch in Indonesia. The Dutch controlled many parts of Indonesia, certainly not all of it, for several hundred years. No one speaks Dutch in Indonesia. When the Dutch went home after the Second World War with the Indonesian independence, the Dutch language went with them. You speak Bahasa Indonesia, which you have to do because now Indonesia is a massive nation state with many, many languages. And Bahasa Indonesia is absolutely important for communication between the different populations of the archipelago. So conquest doesn't spread any language. Alexander the Great never spread any Greek. Genghis Khan did not spread Mongol languages. The British did spread English in Australia because there were thousands of settlers, men, women, children, who went to Australia, took the land from the indigenous people and settled on it and increased their populations. The Dutch were never able to do that in Indonesia because there were too many indigenous people already. And of course, Indonesia being equatorial has diseases like malaria that Europeans were not really able to tolerate very well. So I think early agriculture increased populations massively, and these populations began to seek new agricultural and pastoral lands. This is my early farming dispersal hypothesis. What about Austronesians? Well, if we look at all perspectives, genetic, including ancient DNA, craniofacial study of skeletons and crania, skulls, and linguistic perspectives and archaeology, well, an origin in southern China is fairly obvious, somewhere south of the Yangtze, although the geneticists are now saying that Austronesians also have DNA from the Yellow River, which may have been spread by ancestral Chinese populations very early on. Movement via Taiwan and the Philippines into Indonesia. And then, of course, we have this remarkable migration of Papuan-speaking people that I just talked about into Melanesia. In this case, we have a migration of people. They don't spread the language. They adopt the language of indigenous, of another population, mainly because it was of made their communication much easier. Oh, I'll also, in a moment, just discuss very briefly this question. Was there an Austroasiatic, Vietnamese, Khmer, mainland Southeast Asian migration into Indonesia? I know Truman's very interested in this. There was something happened. I'll just discuss briefly what it might have been before the arrival of Austronesian languages. Well, I won't. These are my assumptions about farming homelands and major language family homelands. And this is where I suspect the major language families of East Asia developed. Up here we have what's called Trans-Eurasian or Altaic. Here, Sino-Tibetan, Chinese people who stayed in China, Tibeto-Burmans, Tibetans, of course, Tibetan Plateau, northern India, right down into Burma. Then Austroasiatic in probably western southern China. And then the Austronesians and their closest cousins, the Thai. Thai or Kra-Dai and Austronesian are related languages. I think most linguists agree this now. The Austronesians went off through Taiwan. The Kra-Dai, of course, moved down into mainland Southeast Asia. And the Austronesians, well, I'll come on to in a minute. Let's see. I'll do this in a moment. Sorry, on the question of Austroasiatic, I do have one observation. On the mainland of Asia, Austroasiatic languages, these dotted ones, like Khmer and Vietnamese nowadays, which are major languages, but these small ones and Munda languages in India, they survive everywhere, even though they have been swamped or overrun by Chinese and Thai and Malay and Chamic and Tibeto-Burman languages, Burmese. They survive. In Indonesia, there are none. And I think that if there had been people related to Khmers or Vietnamese in, say, the interior of Borneo or Sumatra before Austronesians, there would still be Austroasiatic languages there now. There is no sign of them. I mean, no significant sign. There is some DNA evidence from the Nusa Tenggara for the arrival of a mainland population at about the time Austronesians arrived, or maybe just before. But I'm not sure how to explain that, whether it's a hunter-gatherer movement or whether some of it is Austroasiatic people arriving later in time, during historical times. It's a mystery. And without more ancient DNA, I think we may never be absolutely certain. So this is still a question. Yes, it's very possible that Neolithic people from the mainland did come to Sumatra and Borneo in Neolithic times. But the evidence is still, to me, very difficult to see. It's not clear. As for Oceania, well, we now know, of course, that this style of stamped, red-slipped pottery in the Philippines, Mansiri, Bukit Tengkorak, Minangkabau has red-slipped pottery, and through into the Lapita region. This is probably connected with the movement of Austronesians into the Pacific at about 1200 BC. So you can see here Kamasi, Luzon, Magapit, Lapita, Nagsabaran in Luzon, Achugao in the Mariana Islands. They're very closely related, all round about 3,000 years ago. So this is the Lapita movement, which I think is connected with the spread of these Austronesian languages from Proto-Malayo-Polynesian in the Philippines, Proto-Austronesian, of course, located in Taiwan, which is an F. This is Formosa, Taiwan, Philippine, Indonesia, Island Melanesia. And then with a long period of stopping in the Western Pacific prior to the settlement of the outer islands of Polynesia. The Austronesian dispersal took about, 4,000 years to become complete. So we see something like this, maybe 3000 BC, I think now in Taiwan, 2000 BC in the Philippines, 1500 BC at least in Sulawesi, Borneo, later movements perhaps to Vietnam, Lapita about 1100 BC, Samoa 800, then a stop for possibly 1500 years, and then people, ancestral Polynesians, linguistically coming maybe from the Northern Solomons, where there are Polynesian languages, across atolls in the Northern or Central Pacific to settle these islands. New Zealand wasn't reached until 1250 CE, which is somewhere in the Majapahit era in terms of Java, I guess, very recent in time, a long time. And the archaeological record, these people, I think, are the oldest Austronesians that we can see in archaeology in Taiwan, Nanguan Li, about almost 5,000 years ago, pottery, domesticated dogs, very good dogs, big dogs buried complete, adzes, spindle whorls for weaving, bark cloth beaters. This is about, of course, more than 1,000 years before Lapita, so that it's not directly ancestral to it. There must have been older people in mainland China, but because of the complete overlay of Chinese languages now, there's no trace of Austronesian languages in southern China anymore, except, of course, as the cousin family, Thai, which has also come from the same, very close to the same ancestor as Austronesian. And moving down through southern Taiwan into the Batanes Islands, northern Philippines, we see expansion again of all these red slip pottery, lots of stamping, adzes with shoulders and tangs. I won't go into detail here, but because I have written about this a great deal in the past. And I'll just leave you, I'm going to finish now, with one question. In 1975, I went to Easter Island. Here I am. This is almost 50 years ago. And of course, I've never actually been to Bada, but I've been to Sulawesi, but never to this particular monument here. And I always wonder, are they related? This, I wonder, how old is this? Is it Neolithic? It might have carnelian beads around its head. I'm not sure. I don't know what they are really. They're beads of some sort. Angular face. Notice the hands and the fingers just extending to the navel. Well, of course, these statues are very much the same. They have, you can't see it very clearly. It's a very old photo. Hands and fingers extending to just below the navel. Very angular face. A little different, but there's something about these carvings that I always wonder, they're different in date, but is there a tradition here of carving that might have been in wood rather than stone, a tradition that somehow has gone through thousands of years of time with the Austronesian migration. And I think with that topic, I will leave you. I think I've already spent about my 45 minutes. So thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Pa Peter, for the very fruitful presentation.
Okay.
And I believe everyone have a lot of insights for what you have been presented. And also, there are several questions that leave to ignite the discussion that we will start after this. And I think the last picture that you shared with us regarding the Easter Island and also the statues in Bada maybe could be the beginning of our discussion, since I see from all the participants here, we also have our colleagues, researcher Ibu Dwiyani, that have been researched in Bada for several years. So probably before we open the floor, maybe Ibu Dwiyani, you could share some thoughts regarding what Prof. Peter have mentioned in his last pointers. Please, Ibu Dwiyani. Or maybe she's not respond yet, so probably I will open the floor for those who have questions for Professor Bellwood. Please, you can raise your hand.
Yes, I'm sorry I had to speak in English, but my Indonesian, I could not repeat what I said in Indonesian, but I hope that I was clear for those of you who understand it well, and that I was speaking fairly slowly.
Yeah, I think it's very clear, Professor Bellwood.
Okay.
And I think we also have one of our senior here, Professor Iwan Ardika from
oh yes, yes.
University of
Hello,
Udayana. You're still here. Probably you want to share some thought with us, Professor Ardika. Thank you. Yeah, please, Professor Ardika. You already opened the screen.
I'm very sorry. What the problem that we are discussing?
We just open the floor for the discussion. So probably you have some thoughts regarding what have been presented by Professor Bellwood to be shared with us. Thank you, Prof. Ardika.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Ardika. Nice to see you. Oh, by the way, I am looking at a big high screen, so I'm not looking at my computer, which is why I often appear to be looking up into the sky. I have a big screen, which I can see more easily. Yes, Ardika, yes.
Yeah, last time our colleague at Sulawesi, he talking about Maros
Point. Yes.
Tool.
Mm-hmm.
So he believed there was a kind of a conflict between the pre-Austronesian people, what we call it, the
Toalian, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
What do you think, Peter? Is that
well, I
possible?
have yes, I've read some of the recent Indonesian and Australian papers about Sulawesi. It does seem now that I've forgotten the name of the cave, but it does seem that the Maros points are older than the arrival of Austronesians. Yeah, they're connected to the back blades and the microliths, so they are pre-Austronesian, which is very interesting. I suspect, similar things are found, of course, in Northern Australia by facial points. And I've always thought that there were many connections between Indonesia and Northern Australia in prehistoric times. It's not very clear exactly what they were, but I don't think Australia was ever very isolated from Indonesia. So in my first Islanders book, I think I suggested that the Maros points might be Neolithic, but now there is new dating, so I'm happy to agree that they do appear to be older than the arrival of Neolithic cultures. As for conflict, well, of course, yes, I suppose there must have been conflict when Austronesian-speaking people arrived in Sulawesi. There were people there with hunters and gatherers with presumably Toalian stone tools. I suppose there was some conflict. It is very likely, we may never know, but there would have been conflict over land, possibly. It is always possible. So whether, of course, Maros points are for hunting humans or animals, I'm not sure. I'm sure they're very sharp, and if people were fighting, the Maros point on the end of a spear would probably be very, very useful. Has that answered it, the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Hello, Pak Ardika.
Yeah. Yeah. Our colleagues in Sulawesi thinking that there was a conflict between the pre-Austronesian people and the coming of Austronesian speaking people, and the Maros tool indicating some conflict as well, according to him.
Yes.
I read his proposal last time. But
Well, it's possible. I would say it's possible, yeah, but I don't really know. But it's possible.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing, Peter, regarding the origin of agriculture, you think that was originally in island Southeast Asia, or also in New Guinea, as we know that.
New Guinea, yes. There is currently an idea, my colleague Tim Denham, I think, has written about this, that especially in mainland Southeast Asia, southern China, there was domestication of things like yam and taro, and rice is further north. The trouble is to find evidence, because although yam and taro can leave starch, and some plants leave phytoliths, it's very difficult to tell from starch, the starch grains in the plants, whether they are domesticated or not. So this is a very uncertain area. Many people would have been domesticating some plants, I think, especially when they became aware of the existence of farmers. But most of them would not have produced major population spreads of the type that we see with the Austronesians. That was a major population spread. And I suspect that originated in southern China. But certainly local domestication of plants is always possible. That's all really one can say. The evidence is very difficult to find.
Okay.
Okay, Pak Ardika.
Terima kasih Pak Marwan.
Okay, thank you, Pak. Thank you, Pak Peter, as well for the response.
Okay,
and before we move to the next question from the floor, there are two questions from the chat room. I think I will read it. First one is, can you give further explanation on para-Neolithic concept? What are the cultural entities marking of this group?
Yeah. In my first Islanders, I used the term para-Neolithic, which means sort of like the Neolithic, but not completely Neolithic. For these cultures, especially in southern China and northern Vietnam, and I suppose in a sense the Jomon in Japan as well, in some ways, the early Jomon, where hunter-gatherer people were using pottery and groundstone tools, mainly in the Holocene. How and why they developed pottery and groundstone tools, I'm not sure. In the case of Indonesia, not many sites have groundstone tools before the Neolithic. Sue O'Connor, I think, has recently claimed from a cave in maybe Alor or Timor, I don't remember, that there are some chips of grinding, but I'm wondering if they are simply from Neolithic adzes or are they genuinely pre-Neolithic. I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look into that more carefully. Otherwise, in the Philippines and Indonesia, there is not much sign of this kind of grinding of stone tools or the use of coarse vine-rolled pottery before the Neolithic. These para-Neolithic cultures are contemporary, of course, with fully Neolithic cultures in China, in the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. So they were probably not isolated. But these sites do not have rice or millet. They have wild animals, deer and pigs and buffalo. They appear to have been hunters and gatherers who were sort of on the fringes of the Neolithic with a partially Neolithic technology. They're quite interesting. Similar cultures occur in Europe, in Northern Europe, especially in Scandinavia and the Baltic region. It's not unlikely, of course, that foragers would adopt partial agricultural lifestyle, particularly if they came into contact with early farmers. And I think that may be where these para-Neolithic cultures come from. Otherwise, the people themselves, I think, were simply the later Hoabinian people. They were the descendants of the Hoabinians. They were not a Neolithic population. We know that from their skulls and their DNA. They were from before the Neolithic.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Bellwood. And there is also another question. What do you think about the perforated stone or dog hunt stone found in some Mesolithic sites in mainland Southeast Asia, Cambodia or Vietnam, I suppose, as burial gifts?
Perforated stones. I'm not sure I'm not a real expert on lithic things, but are you talking about something in Hoabinian sort of sites? There are perforated shells in Hoabinian sites in southern China. Perforated stones, I'm not very familiar with, I'm afraid. No, so I can't really comment on that.
Okay, Pak Peter. And there is another question as well from Pasoni Wibisono. First, regarding the paddle pottery, which is mostly found in the West, some are dated quite old, such as in Sire caves. Is paddle as an Austroasiatic dispersal feature?
Well, yes. As I said, I think if there were Austroasiatic languages, and of course the term Austroasiatic means language, not pottery. It's language term. If there were, I think there would still be some in the interior of Borneo and Sumatra spoken today, as there are in mainland Southeast Asia, as you know, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia. Austroasiatic, small Austroasiatic languages are found everywhere in small pockets. As for paddle impressed pottery, well, of course, all of the ancient pottery in the mainland of Southeast Asia was to some degree paddle impressed, either with a cordage, string around the paddle, around the beater, or with vines from foliage, or sometimes carved into complicated patterns. The carved one, I think, is mostly Iron Age. I think the carved one is more recent, but the cord marking and the vine marking are older. Well, I'm not familiar with the latest research in Sumatra. I know about Gua Harimau, but the Gua Harimau pottery is, I understand, not much older than 3,000 years at the moment. Are there older pottery assemblages from Sumatra that are older than 3,000 years? That is a question from me for you. I mean, in Sumatra sites, is there pottery before 3,000 years ago?
Peter, the pottery from Gua Harimau is around 3,500.
Yes. Okay. That's similar to everywhere else, of course, in Indonesia. Yeah. So you see, the Gua Sire site, which I thought was much older before, now we have decided that the dating is probably not good. It's not reliable. So there's nothing much before 3,500 years ago, as far as I know, unless there have been some new discoveries that I don't know about.
Okay, Pak Peter. Thank you. And there is also a second question from Pasoni Wibisono about agriculture. I'm interested in sagu, which seems more appropriate to explain about tools such as Neolithic axes. What is your opinion?
Well, yes, sago has to be chopped out of the trunk. Yes, so people in New Guinea who eat, and in Halmahera who eat sago, they use axe-like tools to chop out the sago and then wash it in water to remove the starch. However, I know that in New Guinea, when if stone tools are used for sago, they have a very high, the surface becomes like glass, very shiny, glossy from the sago starch and phytoliths and things. And I've never seen that in Indonesian stone adzes. I have seen it on sago tools from New Guinea. Maybe someone needs to look for it. Yes, it is possible that some stone adzes were used for sago, but if they were, I think you would have very clear evidence on the cutting edge of a very shiny surface produced by the sago.
Okay, thank you, Pak Peter, for the response. Maybe anyone else still have question for Pak Peter from the room? I think I've seen some colleagues as well here that already joined. We also have here Pak Sofwan Nurwidi from the Research Center of Archaeometry. Probably you have some response for what have been presented by Prof. Bellwood. Pak Sofwan, please.
Hello, Sofwan.
Hello, Pak Peter. Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. I think I would like to continue a question from previously sent by Mas Ruli, I think, about Paraneolithic. As I remember, I think there is a ground stone from the lower layer of Gua Harimau from mid-Ocean. And the archaeological context from this level is more correlated with the hunter-gatherer population.
Yes.
Is it possible if the early layer of Sumatra from early Holocene also correlated with Paraneolithic culture, as probably there is no mild agriculture, but probably they develop tabur agriculture. Maybe they protect wild tabur, which is grow along the river in tropical rainforest river, and they keep it to grow more produce, something like that, and they collect from this kind of places for support their carbohydrate, something like that. What do you think about this?
Well, first of course, all hunter-gatherers protect and propagate plants. There are many records in Australia of hunter-gatherers who burn the forest and they replant things and collect things and protect them. Of course, everyone does that. Domesticating animals and plants is a little different. That is another stage altogether. But in the case of Sumatra, I have not visited the shell middens sites like, is it Sukajadi, I think. Do they have any edge ground axes? I have never heard of them being mentioned. I've never seen edge ground tools from the Sumatra Hoabinian shell mounds. But do you know if any have been found in them? Or even pottery in a good context? You know, do they have pottery before the arrival of Neolithic pottery?
I think there is no pottery before Neolithic in Selmida. But in the lower layer of Gua Harimau, there is grinding stone, something like that.
Oh, grinding stone, yeah. Well, of course, everybody has grinding stones. Australia, thousands of grinding stones. Hunter-gatherers use grinding stones, and they go back right to the beginnings of Homo sapiens. But those Sumatra middens are very interesting. I know that most of them are now destroyed, but it would be wonderful if there could be an excavation of one. And you remember some years ago that we discussed with David Reich about getting DNA, but there was no DNA, I think, right? It didn't go. Didn't work. Yeah. That was a pity. Yeah, because they're obviously important sites. Those very large shell mounds.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. I think we need to see carefully what kind of cultural variable for the Paleolithic culture. This is probably developed in Indonesia in the
But just one thing here, you know, there is one major problem that Indonesian and Philippine archaeology have. That is the Neolithic sites. I am sure that in Indonesia, you do have very large Neolithic sites, enormous sites like the ones in Thailand, Vietnam, but you cannot find them because like those Sumatran shell mounds, they are too deeply buried. They're many meters under the ground. And just talking with Ardika will remember that in Sembiran and Pachung, those sites are 2,000 years ago. They're 3 or 4 meters below the ground surface. You can't see them unless somebody has a bulldozer or, you know, there's a big building or something. Archaeologists cannot find those sites because the burial is so deep, so massive because of the, the erosion. I mean, tropical climates have great erosive power, very heavy rain in the monsoon. A lot of soil gets washed down. And that is a problem. To find sites that are maybe 6 or 8 meters below the ground, I don't know the answer. I do know that in Taiwan, the Neolithic sites in Western Taiwan, like Nangguan Li, which are 4,500 years ago, Nangguan Li was 7 meters below the surface. All of alluvium, all of soil washed in off the mountains at the back. And that's a problem, that level, that amount of burial. That is why in Sulawesi, the sites of Kamasi and Minanga-Sipako have been so important because they're a long way inland and they're on a small terrace, very well protected. They haven't been subjected to that kind of massive burial that you tend to get in coastal plains, coastal areas at the bottoms of high mountain ranges. And I see no easy answer for that problem.
Okay, thank you, Pak Peter. Thank you so much for your suggestion. I think this is our homework to solve this kind of problems.
Yes.
Maybe we can, in the future, we can use that technology.
Well, you have to look, of course, you have to look underneath it when you're in Jakarta. You have to look down the holes when they have a big building and see what they're doing. That's very important. That's how many things have been found down with the bulldozers. 10 meters under the ground, things are found. If you have someone there who is looking and carefully seeing what is being found.
So that means north coast of Java and maybe southern coast, eastern coast of Sumatra. Important places.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pak.
Okay.
Thank you, Pak Mahmud.
Thank you, Pak Sofwan, for the question and also response from Pak Peter. We still have around 10 minutes, and we already have a question from Ibu Anggraini here from the chat room. She apologized because of the internet connection, so I will read the question once more. My classic question to Peter is, who do you think had introduced metallurgy into Indonesia? Bronze and iron appear together in many Indonesian sites, and many of them shows a degree of similarity to metal artifacts from Vietnam and Thailand. But Austroasiatic language were only retained in some small tribes in Kalimantan, as you just explained. What do you think?
Well, as far as I know, the oldest bronze and objects in Indonesia are from Gua Harimau. Is that right? About 500 BC, I think, bronze items. No iron. Iron, I think, is a little bit younger than that, but the bronze items, the socketed axes, yes, of course, they're like the ones in Thailand and southern China. I suspect that technology comes from Bronze Age China through Thailand and Vietnam and into Indonesia, possibly 500-600 BC. In southern Vietnam, the oldest, and in Thailand, as Charles Hyam has said many times, the oldest bronzes are about 1000 or 1100 BC, not older. So I think bronze in Indonesia must be a little younger than that. Yes, I think that technology was introduced from mainland Southeast Asia. As for the iron, well, of course, both India and China are definite possibilities. India, as far as I understand, India has, in terms of technology, has the closest iron working to Iron Age Indonesia, because the Chinese were involved in cast iron from quite early on, and the Indonesian iron is hammered, like the early Indian iron. I think India might be the source of iron. So it may be that the socketed bronze tools and the iron are a little different in origin. Mainland Southeast Asia and southern China versus India, perhaps, for iron. But I'm really only guessing. It's very difficult to know exactly where inventions come from, I suppose. But that would be my view at the moment. But am I right? The Gua Harimau bronze axes and other items, they are still the oldest copper bronze metal in Indonesia, I think, aren't they? Is that right, Truman? The bronze tools from Gua Harimau are the oldest ones in Indonesia to be dated.
Pak Truman, maybe you can respond, Pak Peter. Or maybe Ruli is one of the team that usually work in Gua Harimau, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Prof. Yes, apparently until now we believe that the one individual, we took a sample from a tooth, molar tooth from one individual with the secondary burial, its tree skull, its collective burial, and then just beneath this burial we found a socket axe.
I've seen
the type 4. And we dated it's about 2400 BP. If I'm
years ago. So that's about 500 BC.
Yeah. Okay. Before we expecting it's to be more younger, like for example, like 2000 something or 1800 something, just like another burials we uncovered in Gua Harimau. Maybe Prof Truman expert on this, but and can give an better insight. But we also think that we should date it again. We should confirm this date again because it's only one date, and then but it's really highly controlled. But we believe that if we have another dates on this secondary burial associated with the metal objects, it will be more good. But we are assured that the metal age in Gua Harimau it's about 1800 something BPs.
But to me, a date of 2,400 years ago for a socketed bronze axe in Western Indonesia is very possible. It's very likely. I think it's probably correct, because of course of the dates from Vietnam and Thailand, which are very close by, very very near.
Maybe that's. And for the Neolithic, the oldest in Sumatra, not remember correctly, but maybe from Bukit Arad, if you heard about it, from Dominic Bonat's, it's about
Yes, I think I have.
3,400. Yeah, it's an open air site, the oldest open air site from Neolithic culture in Indonesia, associated also with the megalithic monuments. And yeah, we must make a reinvestigation on that dates.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all my insight, Pak Marlon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Ruli, for the insights regarding the Gua Harimau. I think probably Pak Truman have some problem with the connection here, Pak Peter. So
okay.
He's not in the room for now. And actually, we still have like 2 or 3 minutes, but if anyone still have a question, please, you can raise your hand or ask directly. If it's not, then probably I think we can close for the discussion sessions. And I would like to say thank you very much for Pak Peter for the very comprehensive presentation and also responses to all the questions. It's a very fruitful indeed. And I believe that probably there are still a lot of questions from everyone who attended this meeting, but yeah, we, as always, we are limited by the time. Therefore, I have to end the discussion here. However, I think for anyone who have a question for Pak Peter, you can ask directly by email, and I'm sure Pak Peter will be very happy to answer all the question. And also, thank you once again for everyone who has shared thoughts and question as well during this session, and of course for Professor Peter Bellwood for have shared his inspiring presentation and thoughts for all of us. And to conclude this fruitful discussion, I would like to invite our teacher and mentor as well in Indonesia, who is also once a student and colleague for Professor Peter Bellwood, Dr. Daud Aristano Dirjo, to share his thought as well, and at the same time to share the closing remarks for this discussion. Please, Pak Daud.
Okay, thank you, Marlon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly, Pak Daud.
Okay.
Please.
Hi, Peter. Nice to
Hello,
meet you.
Daud. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. Jenny and Make send regard to you, and Claudia as well, of course.
Yes, Claudia is not here. Well, she's she's out at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, first of all, I would like to congratulate Peter on his recent award for his new book, The 5 Million Years Odyssey.
It's in the USA.
Some of the review I read, yeah, it's tell about very comprehensively on the origin of humankind and also human journey to agriculture, yeah, at least, yeah. And certainly, thanks, Peter, for such a great lecture. It really gave us so much new knowledge, yeah, about the world archaeology issues now. Yeah, of course, this lecture really opened our mind about many important issues in the world that we might have missed to follow. Yeah, so sometimes we understand there are many information, new information that we could not follow, yeah, because accessibility sometimes is rather difficult for us here. Yeah, we have to pay for the journal, the qualified journal. Sometimes it's rather difficult. Fortunately, we have also can access open access journal, which is quite helpful. But not all the important information we can access now. Yeah. This lecture really made us aware that we need to learn more and more to catch up with the new progress in the archaeological works, which move so fast and increasingly complex. Yeah. So, like you mentioned before, we need to have a multidisciplinary perspective, and I think we still need to do more on this because we Indonesian archaeologists tend there to work by our own self, and not to learn from other disciplines, for example. I think you also mentioned about the importance to work together with the biologists or molecular genetic expert and linguistics, and of course paleo-environmental studies, because as you mentioned before that maybe Java has quite many Neolithic sites, but it's deep buried under the present surface. So we have to work together with our colleague from the paleo environmentalists. Yeah, and I personally quite interesting in the paleo environment, and also related to the migration of people into Indonesia. I'm quite interested to study more on the what we call as Indonesian true flow. Yeah, I think there are very big body of water flowing from Pacific into the Indian Ocean, but we never consider it as a factor in the human migration, I guess. But I think this is, for me, it's quite interesting to consider, because I found myself, after reading a lot of books and also information that which I can access, it seemed to me there is something like maybe I personally want to say it as something like a divided cultural landscape between the Kalimantan, Borneo, and Sulawesi, because and this has happened from the as far as I can get the data from the arrival of modern human in Indonesian archipelago, because we can see that for example, rock art, the oldest rock art is always found in eastern Kalimantan and also in Sulawesi, South Sulawesi. This is something like the past of the Indonesian true flow. And you also mentioned about the your red slate pottery. Now you try to move that, and the red slate pottery are only found in the eastern part of the Wallace line. I think this is the Wallace line is almost similar to the Indonesian true flow. So I think this is quite a factor that quite interesting to be considered as a factor for migration process.
Yes, yes.
So also for the Denisovan, for example, it's only found in the eastern part of the Wallace land as well, and maybe in the Philippines as well.
You mean the DNA? Yes, yes.
That's very interesting to me. But even in the historic time, for example, Chinese people try to divide it Indonesian archipelago into two parts. The first is the Kunlun, that is the eastern part, western part of Indonesian archipelago, and then the eastern part of the archipelago, they call it as a Chuanlun. They describe the people is quite different, with the more curly hair, with more darker skin, etc. So it seems there is something like what I said as a divided cultural landscape. Yeah, maybe people can move from one place from Western Indonesia to Eastern Indonesia, but there is something like a cultural obstacle to go inside, into mix with the other. Yeah, of course, in several places they will also have a mix or something like that. But this is quite interesting for me personally. But I still have to learn more about that, about this phenomena, I think. Yeah. So this is why I'm trying to learn about the paleo environment as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think another lesson learned from this lecture is how you try to bring us to another area of the world to learn about the pattern, especially the migration, for example. You gave the example from other part of world, so we can learn the pattern of migration, that we can more improve our understanding of Austronesian migration. Yeah, for our colleagues in Indonesia, I think we thankful for you, because you broaden our perspective. So it is important as well not to just focus on our topic in Indonesia, but also to learn from other side of the world, something like that. That's it, very important for us, I think. Yeah. So migration is not just a simple movement of people, but there are many things to be considered. Yeah, like you suggest on the, for example, on the movement of people from Asia to Europe, for example. Yeah, you mentioned before. Yeah, I think we need more critical in considering the migration process, not just as a movement of people, but there are many social factors, environmental factors that we have to be aware of, because this is sometimes become the obstacle, or sometimes because the push factor or a pull factor or something else. Yeah, I think we study from we learn from your lecture about that. And I think thanks also for reminding us the need to work together with other disciplines, like I said before. Yeah, I think we are all aware that archaeological records are so limited and incomplete, and without multidisciplinary approach, it would be very difficult for us to get better understanding about the past. Yeah, and I actually several times I try to remind and stress to my colleague Indonesian archaeologists, yeah, how to need to work with other scholars. Yeah, I sometimes mention that archaeologists with others, that it's not only archaeologists but with others. Yeah, yeah. So I think this lecture also encouraged us to reflect on what we have done so far. Yeah, where are Indonesian archaeology now? In the broad word archaeology. Yeah, and then where are we going to from here? Yeah, so we have to set our own agenda to address many issues that the word on the word archaeology, especially related to our prehistory in our history in Indonesia. Yeah. And another thing that I take note on that is about the issue that you raised about the what you call it, something like Western route migration. Yeah, and you still don't know the answer why genetic the people genetic of the Western Indonesia is more quote unquote Asiatic rather than like in the rest of the in the eastern part of Indonesia, and but they also speak Austronesian. Yeah, so you mentioned about the hypothesis migration suggested by Harry Truman, for example. Yeah. So after you give us about what happened in Melanesia, I just wonder, do you think what happened in Melanesia, where the later migration, although they are Melanesian people, but they prefer to use the Malayo-Polynesian. How about in Western Indonesia? It is not possible that this also happened in Western Indonesia, where people from mainland Asia, Southeast Asia, moved. For example, during the Dongsong time, for example, yeah. But they prefer to use Austronesian rather than they use their own language. Do you think this is possible to happen as well? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think the issue here is, I'm sorry, I must apologize for my dogs there, but you can probably hear dogs barking. They're mine, and I think they've finished. The question here, of course, with the Austroasiatic movement is, was it before the Austronesian arrival or after? Now, if it was after, then it's a problem. Of course, they would probably adopt Austronesian languages. If it was before, then there's a more problem, because then you have to explain why they did not populate the whole place and survive. But if they come after, like in Dongshan times, then of course it's very likely that small groups will just be assimilated into the majority Austronesian population. I think, you see, my view of migration is not in terms of thousands, as I said before, not in terms of thousands of people migrating together. It's in terms of very small groups who go somewhere, but then increase the population inside the migration. So the migration grows from inside rather than being, fully formed, complete at the beginning with many, many people. It grows as it spreads, which is a very old idea. And when this happens, then many things, people can, of course, change their languages. But on a local scale, certainly with the whole of Austronesian, to me, the spread has been by the movement of people, increasing populations, migrating, not by people who have changed their languages. The Papuan people who went to Melanesia are different. They are the opposite, because they're also a migration, but they adopted the language of the indigenous people. Sometimes that happens. We have to, everything is a little bit different. Yes, I mean, I suppose there is a general picture, a broad picture, but within it, there are many small places where things might be different on a small scale locally. So, of course, it does become, we cannot understand everything. We will never know exactly what happened everywhere. We can only understand the general trends, I think, in developments in prehistoric time. And there will always be limitations to how far we can interpret things.
Yeah, Peter. Yeah. So I think I just want to make our Indonesian colleagues aware about the issue that immigration is not only just simple movement of people, but there are many like the language may be quite complicated. How the language saved and how the language are adopted by the newcomer or something like that. Yeah. So this is need to be addressed in Indonesia as well. Yeah, I think. Yeah. I believe that Indonesia archipelago has quite many to offer for some answer for the question on the word heritage issues right there.
Yes, yes.
As the history has proved it, I believe that Indonesian archipelago is one of the strategic places where many evidence of human journey from the past to the present time could be found. Indonesian archipelago has evidently contributed important information like by divided biogeography realm that Wallace suggested. For example, the first claim of the missing link, the first discovery of Homo erectus, Petuboa, for example, the discovery of Homo florensis, the traces of Denisovan so far, and the oldest rock art, just to mention few of them. I think we need to work more harder to find much more important information about the history of human in archipelago, especially when they adapt to the archipelagic environment. I think I remember I wrote a small article, popular one in Compass, in 1995. I consider that Indonesia is the missing link for the what you call insert of humankind, something like that, story. So I think I just want to remember that we have quite a potential to contribute such information, important information. So once again, I would like to thank Peter for this great lecture, and I think CPAS need to organize more lecture like this one. And I believe Peter is also willing to be invited as the resource person like in this occasion. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, but it's been very good to see so many old faces, people that I've known for many years, amongst the list of names. I can see you all there. And I'm sorry that I missed many of you at IPPA in Chiang Mai. I know that a few of you were there. And I've enjoyed this, and I wish you all the best of luck with future research in Indonesia. You know, your islands are very important in understanding the Asia and the Pacific. Of course, they are a major linking passageway between some very major parts of the world. Okay, well, thank you very much, and all the best to everybody.
Yes. Okay, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Bye-bye. Yes, I will leave you all. Okay.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
I send you some email, Peter, but it seemed that you didn't get it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Dowd. Good. Okay, I will leave the meeting. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Pak Peter. Dowd.
Terima kasih juga Mas Marlon, Pak Daud.
Terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih semuanya. Dan sudah
Terima kasih
Mas Sofan.
Mas Roman.
Pak Artikel. Ya.
Terima kasih Pak Marlon. Dan
terima kasih.
terima kasih.